Greetings and welcome on behalf of the Lumen Christi Institute. My name is Michael Le Chevalier and I'm Associate Director here. If you're unfamiliar with us, Lumen Christi was founded in 1997 by Catholic scholars at the University of Chicago, and our mission is to make the Catholic intellectual tradition a living dialogue partner here at the University of Chicago and in our broader society through courses, lectures, summer seminars, conferences, and virtual events like these. I just want to call your attention to a few upcoming events that we are hosting. This Tuesday, our series on Hispanic theology continues with a moderated conversation around Latino youth and evangelization that will feature Claudia Herrera and Jose Matos Alfont and moderated by Peter Casarella. Next week, Thursday, we're hosting an especially unique event, an event on Bernard McGinn's latest and final book on the crisis of mysticism, the presence of God, volume 7. This is the final within the final book of the Presence of God series. And as a part of this, we are having in conversation around this text, Bernard McGinn, Father David Tracy, and Sister Sandra Schneiders. In a conversation that'll be moderated by Wilhelmine Otten from the University of Chicago Divinity School. You can see a link for that within the chat. And finally, 1 week from today, co-hosting with the Harvard Catholic Forum, we have The Virgin Mary in the Art of Latin America, 1520 to 1820, with Galvin Bailey from Queen's University. Today's event today reflects our ongoing habit at the Institute to look at the news and to use it as an opportunity to dive deep into the Church's intellectual tradition. I'm especially excited to be hosting great conversation partners and friends here, but also our two distinguished professors on the panel who are our primary presenters today, also co-present and teach our summer seminar on Truth and Authority in Augustine's City of God for graduate students every other summer. I want to express my gratitude to America Media, our co-sponsor for today's event, for helping to ensure the success of the event. Now, you too can help ensure the success of all of our programming in 3 different ways. First, you can join our mailing list or follow us on social media and share word about these events with others. Word of mouth remains the most effective means of inviting others into the Catholic intellectual tradition. You can even like us on YouTube or leave feedback on the podcast version of these talks, wherever you might listen to them, to help the algorithms of big tech bend towards the Catholic intellectual tradition. At the end of the event, you will be given an opportunity to participate in a survey that will help us to gauge what we're doing right and what needs improving. Filling it out, you'll enter a raffle to win a gift card to our favorite independent bookstore, the Seminary Co-op. Finally, you can support us financially today by donating at www.lumenchristi.org/donate. A gift of any kind helps us to continue to make programs like these available for free to viewers like you. Now, I now have the pleasure of introducing our full panel. Moderating today's conversation is Professor Jennifer Frey, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the University of South Carolina and Fellow of the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America. She was previously Collegiate Assistant Professor of Humanities at the University of Chicago, where she was a member of the Society of Fellows in the Liberal Arts and affiliated faculty in the Philosophy Department, and also, most especially exciting for us, Assistant Director at the Lumen Christi Institute. In addition to being a distinguished scholar, Jen is also a public scholar with a fantastic podcast, Sacred and Profane Love. I invite you to learn more about that in the link posted within the chat. Professor Russell Hittinger is a senior fellow at the Lumen Christi Institute and has been this year visiting professor at the University of Chicago Law School and Professor Emeritus of Catholic Studies and Law at the University of Tulsa. He is also associated here with the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago. He is also Ordinaris of the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of St. Thomas Aquinas. He's the author of many books, but we are all especially looking forward to his forthcoming Paper Wars, Catholic Social Doctrine and the Modern State. And finally, Father Michael Sherwin is professor of fundamental moral theology at the University of Freiburg, Switzerland. He is also taught at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, where he received his initial formation as a Dominican and was ordained priest in 1991. Father Sherwin is director of the St. Thomas Aquinas Institute for Theology and Culture and of the PINCARES archives. Author of articles on the psychology of love, virtue ethics, and moral development, his monograph, By Knowledge and by Love, Charity and Knowledge in the Moral Theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, has newly been reissued in paperback. So it's exciting once more to have this full panel of speakers. I invite them now to unmute themselves, to turn on their screen, and I hand it to you, Jen, to take us away and take us into this conversation. Thank you all.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. And thanks to the Lumen Christi Institute for allowing me once again to talk about great books in the Catholic intellectual tradition with my friends. And of course, good morning to everyone who's joined us on this call. Thanks for being here for this conversation about St. Augustine and his concept of a people. So, as has been widely remarked upon, towards the end of his inaugural address, President Biden made the following reference to St. Augustine's classic text, The City of God. He said, "Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love." Biden went on to ask, what are the common objects we love and that define us as Americans? He then proposed the following list of objects: opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. So we thought, given this unprecedented invocation of St. Augustine in a US inaugural address, we thought it would be helpful to try to place this quotation in its original context, which of course is the City of God, in an effort to help us learn what Augustine can teach us about our contemporary situation. So, Father Michael, I want to put the first question to you. What is Augustine's interest in the concept of a people in the City of God, and how does this concept figure in his overall argument? And what's the ultimate significance of the question for him?
All very good questions. I want to begin by saying hello to both of you. And Professor Frey, thank you for agreeing to moderate this again. It should not pass unnoticed that this is the feast of St. Joseph the Worker, therefore also the 30th anniversary of Centesimus Annus and the 130th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. So it's the perfect context for us to have this discussion. And perhaps the easiest way to answer, the quickest way to answer your first question is to say that Augustine develops a definition of a populace, a people, in order to help him convey what it means to be a citizen of the eternal city. But he does this fascinatingly for us by drawing upon Cicero's understanding of a republic that he develops in his dialogue, the Res Publica, that many sections of which we only know because Augustine preserves them in the City of God. So I thought it might be good just to look at some of the text quickly so that those who are following along can have a sense of what it is exactly that we're looking at. And let me see if I can share this with you all. Let's see. Do you see the quotation from Cicero? Everyone sees that? Okay, so the first thing that Augustine does in Book 2 of the City of God is to draw upon Cicero's conception of the way in which the republic, the public thing, the public concern, is really what res publica means, how they've inherited a situation that is not what it used to be. Now, already Cicero is putting a little bit of distance between himself and the situation in Rome during his day by setting his dialogue, modeled after the Republic or the Politeia of Plato, setting it back 100 and so, almost 200 years before his period. And he has this to say: but our age, receiving the res publica as a masterpiece of another age, which has already begun to grow old, has not merely neglected to restore the colors of the original, but has not even made the effort to preserve its general outline and most outstanding features. So it's the Republic, through the analogy of almost like an icon or a mosaic, not only has it lost its colors, but even the outlines of the image are fading. For what survives of that primitive morality, which the poet called Rome's safeguard, it is so obsolete and forgotten that far from practicing it, one does not even know it. And of the citizens, what shall I say? Morality has perished through poverty of great men, a poverty for which we must not only assign a reason, but for the guilt of which we must answer as criminals charged with a capital crime. For it is through our vices and not by any mishap that we retain only the name of a res publica and have long since lost the reality. So those are paragraphs, words that echo down the centuries, preserved for us uniquely by Augustine. And then, as part of his continuing critique of what has happened to the city of Rome, he has this to say about what a republic is. A res publica is the concern of a people. So the race of a people, but a people is not any group of men assembled in any way, but an assembled multitude associated with one another through agreement on right and a community of utility. So he has this personage of the past, Scipio Aemilianus, give that definition, and Augustine draws on that. And draws on Cicero's and Sallust's critique of what's happened to the Republic to basically say that according to that definition, Rome never was a republic because true justice never existed within it. In saying that, Augustine in some ways is drawing upon the criticism that the Roman Stoics are already making on the Republic. But his main concern is to use these tools to develop what he wants to do, which is to contrast the earthly city with the heavenly city. So now we jump to book 19, and he says, but if we discard this Cicero's definition of a people and assuming another, say that a people is an assembled rational multitude bound together by a common agreement as to the objects of their love, then in order to discover the character of any people, we have only to observe what they love. And he's going to draw on this to be able to say and distinguish the different types of societies. Now, he's going to, if in the book 2, it seemed like he was denying that the Roman Republic was a republic, under this new definition, he's able to recognize that they were a republic. What I say of this people and of this res publica, I must be understood to think and say of the Athenians or any other Greeks, of the Egyptians, of the Assyrians, of early Babylon, and every other gens, every other nation, great or small, which ruled by means of a common thing, a public thing. So the republic. So wherever you have people gathered, united by their love of something, that allows them to have be a people and found a republic. Certainly, this is the great difference. Now, he's going to distinguish, therefore, what you love is going to distinguish each of the peoples and their governments. Certainly, this is the great difference which distinguishes the two cities of which we speak, the one being the society of the pious, the other of the impious, each associated with the angels that adhere to their party, that is the good angels or the demons, and the one is guided by the love of God, the other by the love of self. So the two contrasting cities, the earthly city and the heavenly city, and Augustine's primary concern is to show the way in which the citizens of the earthly city, the citizens of the eternal city participate in this world with the citizens of the earthly city. The peace of the celestial city is the perfectly ordered and harmonious society of enjoying God and one another in God. Societas fruendi Deo et invicem in Deo. The peace of all things is the tranquility of order. So that's the larger piece of living in harmony with the nature of things throughout all of creation. This heavenly city then, while it sojourns on earth, calls citizens out of all nations and gathers together a pilgrim society, a marvelous expression, societas peregrina, of all languages. And I think what's important for our discussion is the way in which these two peoples and therefore cities interrelate. Even the heavenly city, therefore, during its pilgrimage, avails itself of earthly peace, and so far as it can, without injuring faith and piety, desires and maintains a common agreement of human wills regarding the acquisition of the necessities of life, and makes this earthly peace bear upon the peace of heaven. So this strange way in which the citizens, the pilgrim citizens of heaven, participate and promote the transitory temporal peace of the earthly city. While on its pilgrimage, the heavenly city possesses this heavenly peace by faith. And by this faith, it lives justly when it refers to the attainment of that peace, every good action towards God and man. For the life of the city is certainly a social life, which is a great, I think, way to stop our little intro. And my long series of quotations is a way of answering your question. I think we can turn that off. So yes, Augustine uses the definition of what it means to be a people to help convey our relationship with what is permanent, our relationship with heaven, and how we are to live now in faith, referring everything towards that heavenly kingdom.
Thank you. Russ, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure, especially about Cicero, I suppose. There were a number of reasons that Augustine was so attracted to Cicero, and uses him from the very beginning of his adult intellectual life. Cicero is there in spirit. Well, first of all, Cicero was the great rhetorician and linguist. So by the time that Augustine is born, 354, in a little Roman municipality in North Africa, I mean, anyone who wants to be educated in the Latin tongue, read Cicero. I mean, he is the text, right? But also, Cicero was the primary vehicle for translating Greek science, philosophy, wisdom into Latin. So if you wanted to learn philosophy or law, or even some of the sciences, you have to receive the Greeks basically in the Latin tongue through Cicero. But perhaps the most important reason that he is glued to Cicero all the way through his career, Cicero is the last Republican. That the Republic had survived for more than 700 years. By the way, we Americans are destroying ours in less than 300. The Romans had a good run of it, almost 700 years of Republican government. Then there were civil wars, moral breakdown, and dictatorship, and then empire, right? So that Cicero, who was murdered in a power struggle of 43 BC, on the wrong side of a power struggle, he's the last of the Mohegans for a literate citizen of the Roman Empire. It's Cicero. And he told the story that all the Roman writers told that really is the beachhead for the city of God. And the story is pretty simple. After 700 plus years of Republican government, the Romans' inordinate love of domination, money, pleasure, did them in. And Cicero reports that. In fact, he becomes the victim of it, right? Just before the imperial war, he is the victim of it. And so why is this a beachhead? Well, first of all, two things. Augustine wants us to learn what a republic is. And by the way, there's a very technical meaning for a republic that is a republican form of government, although res publica can mean any political society. But republican form has to do with this. Something commonly possessed, not just by a family, emphasizing liberty and competition for the common good, rotation of office holders. If it's our thing, commonly, then we should rotate offices. It's based chiefly on honor and moral probity, and it never deifies its leaders. Unlike the Egyptians and the Assyrians and others, republics do not deify their leaders. Constant reform is necessary of a republic. They're really hard to keep together because there's competition and factionalism, and it is not a dictatorship. So people really do have to agree on things, and they have to moderate their lust for power within that. And so, so here we have a situation of a marvelous 700-year republic that goes down the tubes. It kind of miraculously reappears as an empire with another 600 years on it. But Augustine wants to teach us two things. One, what is a republic? What is a political community? He wants to give us a definition of that. But number two, he wants to teach us also how to lose one. I mean, this is not a rule book for the technicality of losing a republic. Rather, it's a rule book for how to inherit a kingdom. That is, we have to learn how to deal with our grief when Roman order disperses, falls in on itself. And that's what the saints, as pilgrims here on earth, always have to learn. You have to learn how to deal with grief, and that these cities and these polities don't last forever. And the second part of the city of God is a kind of lesson in how to inherit the kingdom according to the wisdom of Christ. So there we go.
Well, yeah, so it's really interesting to me that I mean, it's really interesting to me that Cicero is arguing that sort of, or that the argument is that it's bad character, right, which can undo a republic. It sort of reminds me of the kind of strand of what we call civic republicanism and the founding fathers, right? So people like Washington and Adams who are arguing like, look, if we don't have a moral people, if we don't have people with good character, this is all going to fall apart. And for that reason, they wanted there to be a strong religious aspect, not an establishment, of course, but for there to be, a robust religious presence, because they thought, okay, well, the job of the government can't be to make men good, right? We have to, the churches have to do that. They sort of thought that it was foundational. And at any rate, it brings me to my next question, which is if we look at book 19, the broader context is he's talking about virtue and happiness, right? And so the question is, and I think this remark is a clue, right? How does his politics relate and his notion of a people relate to his ideas about virtue and happiness? And that's a question for you, Father Michael.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say I thought Russ's presentation was a tour de force. I think it's absolutely amazing to see how the heritage of pagan Rome is transmitted to us by Augustine. There are passages that we only know from him, and he is, in a sense, leading us to mourn the demise of the Republic. I think that's exactly right. And the marvelous passage where Scipio talks about the different ways in which governments, whether it's ruled by a king, ruled by the optimes, so by a small group of nobles, or whether the whole populace, all forms can become tyrannical in one way or another. You can have a government led by faction, or the people can become the tyrant. So the question of virtue immediately emerges. But for Augustine, I think immediately, especially if you take seriously that the turning point of the City of God is Book 10, and the religious character of virtue, and the ways in which there's really only two options: a well-ordered love that therefore has God as your prince, as your king, or a disordered love and you become united to the spiritual powers that have rejected God. There's no in between. There's no neutral stance. You're either in the harbor of God's protection and the protection of his angels, or you become the plaything of the rebel angels. And that's a theme that is repeated throughout Western literature, Western history. It's already in Boethius, and you see it. The best in English language is Macbeth. The whole play turns on the fact that Macbeth thinks that he's got powers that are helping him attain his disordered goals, and in fact, they help lead him and everything he loves to destruction. So you either have a well-ordered love that is disposing you to love God in all things rightly, or your disorder becomes worse and worse. And so virtue. What more to say? For him, it's all part. He redefines the heritage, the Greek and Roman heritage of the cardinal virtues, which of course get their name from his mentor, Ambrose. He redefines them in terms of forms of charity, this rightly ordered love that disposes you to judge correctly about what you should do here and now, which is phronesis, animated by love, so prudence animated by love, to render each one, God and neighbor, what is due to them. You are disposed to do that because of your well-ordered love. Your courage to die for the gospel as a martyr, that is also because of your well-ordered love, that you're even willing to die your earthly life for the justice towards your neighbor or the spiritual good of your neighbor. All of this becomes possible because you love things rightly, passing things as passing things, beautiful and good, sacramental. They reveal something of the eternal, but they're not eternal. But so you love them rightly, temperate as temporal goods, and then also if in times of danger, what is most likely to lead you away from the good is fear of death, you need that courage. But in government, in governing, whether you have whatever post you have, whether it's the father of a family or a local town mayor or whatever different job, a teacher, what is most likely, if you're not functioning as a soldier, it's not fear that's most likely to get you acting foolishly, it's disordered pleasure. And so this sophrosune, which the one thing I criticize poor old Cicero for is choosing temperantia to translate sophrosune. He discusses whether he should do that. It only focuses on one aspect of sophrosune, which really means to be in your right mind because you love pleasure, the bodily pleasures of food, drink, and sex correctly, rightly. All of these things are possible for Augustine because your love is rightly ordered. You love things as you should. And that, once again, shows how what it means to be a people is if you love as you should, you're loving with these dispositions that God gives you in grace to love them in kind of put everything in the current with which you flow towards God.
Did you want to add anything to that, Russ?
Yeah, in the early 21st century, we tend to think of justice, or what is the virtue of justice, to stay on Father Sherwin's theme, chiefly in terms of something impersonal. Justice is a facet or a property of institutions. We will talk about a just welfare program. Okay. Whereas the word just is something that modifies a person. First and foremost, it modifies a person. And if it modifies a person, it modifies what kind of soul they have, their heart, as Augustine would put it. And so we think of it rather impersonally in terms of institutions, devices, instruments, programs, policies. You see where I'm going with this. But that's not Augustine, because in the classical world, of course, they knew about the art of politics. They knew about foundings. They knew about creating republics. They knew about sewer systems for a city of 1 million people. Rome at the time was, first century, was 1 million people. And they had everything that art at that point could supply for the benefit of such a huge multitude. But they knew that without the citizens, which means their hearts, that's why he keeps on their hearts, they're like living stones, right? They animate the city. And without the citizens, the city are just empty walls, right? So Augustine follows, I think, a very classical model, and one, of course, that's deeply informed by the notion of the people of God, the Christian understanding of unity of hearts. So justice is in the first place where people's hearts are and what they're agreeing on, the objects of their love and their patterns of doing that. That's the vita socialis, this social life. And politics is a social life for Augustine. So if you think you can maintain a city just by building more aqueducts or learning how to fix the aqueducts without looking at the hearts of the people and their pattern of loves, you're not in the real world. And here we have the concrete instance. 410 AD, Alaric sacks the city of Rome. Was the populace destroyed? I mean, when the buildings were burnt, right, and all the disorder was created? What Augustine has to say no, because political order is not the walls. It's the concordia with hearts, concordia. And so, yeah, that's the Augustinian approach. And it obviously has to have a notion of virtue. To come back to Father Sherwin's answer, of course, yes.
Well, I just
You know, one thing, Jen, getting back to the second part of your question.
Yeah.
A book that I had an impact, it's a small book, but it had an impact, was by, is it Miller? He's the one who wrote Lincoln's Virtues. but he wrote a earlier book called The Business of May Next, where he looks at how those who are going to be participating in the constitutional convention were trying to figure out how to promote a virtuous republic without creating some new form of tyranny. And especially Madison's letters to Jefferson, who was our representative in France. And so they were back and forth. Jefferson wasn't able to be a part of the convention. And it is very, very interesting to see this was a big concern to them. And you see this in when Tocqueville famously comes to America in the 1830s, his concern that all of these wonderful intermediate organizations that were forming people in virtue were not actually mandated by the Constitution, but that constitutional government depended upon what famously he's going to describe as the habits of the heart. That if you don't love justice, rendering to each one his or her due, if you don't love representative government and trying to use parliamentary procedures to promote the common good, you're not going to defend them. And so they were good students of the classical tragedy, and they were concerned about it. And their letters are fascinating.
Yeah, so just a really quick follow-up. So the extent to which St. Augustine is a student of Cicero and other pagans, someone who reads The City of God, it would be very easy to come away with the view that Augustine actually holds a kind of a low opinion of the pagans. Like, he's very harsh on them, even in some of the chapters or the books that we're talking about this morning. And you yourself, Father Michael, said that for Augustine, all the virtues become forms or aspects of caritas, which the pagans themselves wouldn't have possessed. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of wondering to what extent does he embrace, the pagan sources about justice, given, that he doesn't seem to want to extend virtue to them.
Well, I hear that's a very big question, and I hear another question behind it, which is the classic 19th century, I'd say up until mid 20th century debate between what you could describe as Thomist school of reading pagan virtue and Augustinian school, and I'm among those. I'm accused of being an Augustinian Thomist, and I am one of those who thinks that the way to understand Aquinas is to see him as an Augustinian who uses Aristotelian tools. And the way to understand Augustine is to see someone who, as he got more and more involved in pastoral ministry, drew more heavily on Aristotelian language. But nonetheless, I think we have if we're going to let Augustine and Aquinas speak to us, we have to put them into their context. It's not because of his Christian commitments that Augustine cannot grant pagan virtue as real virtue. It's because of the pagans' commitments to their notion of virtue. Let me explain what I mean. Augustine holds that we aren't happy in this life. We have a foretaste of happiness, but our happiness is in heaven. Now, if you read Seneca in his letters, he thinks he can be perfectly happy because that's what virtue gives. And so Aquinas, because he's not really having any conversation with any pagans, he can develop a Christian understanding of true but imperfect happiness and true but imperfect virtue. He can develop that notion. But if you were to tell Seneca, you're your virtues, your excellences don't make you happy. They don't attain what you hold them to attain. But I'm willing to grant you that they are true virtues. That's cold comfort for a pagan. So there's no space conceptually for Augustine to hold that there are true but imperfect pagan virtue when he's talking to the pagans, because he's denying the heart of the pagan claim, which is that by their virtue, they can attain perfection and happiness. And as he beautifully says about the Stoics, they're not happy, they're bravely unhappy. So at the end of the day, when you read Aquinas's understanding of pagan happiness, the expert of whom in the sed contra is Job, Aquinas's notion of imperfect happiness and imperfect virtue is not all that far from Augustine's notion. It's just that the terminology necessarily has to be different.
Okay. I would like to say in response to that, but I want to thank you. It's helpful. Okay, so I want to talk about common loves.
We've got
right?
Russell wanting to say something.
Russ, go ahead.
On virtue, he doesn't deny the virtues of the pagans. Now, I mean, the two most important pagan characters that we can learn from in some constructive way in the first 10 books are Regulus, Marcus Regulus, who as much as if he were Dante, Regulus really would be in purgatory on his way to heaven, I think. Cato probably not. But Regulus was a Roman general who, during the First Punic War, about midway through the 3rd century BC, was captured by the Carthaginians, and he was released on parole that he would go back to Rome and make a deal with Rome to release prisoners and so on and so forth. And Regulus swore by the gods that he would return no matter what the answer was. He goes to Rome. Rome says, no, we're not going to make any deal whatsoever. And in honor, not of Rome or of the Carthaginians, but of the gods, he went back to Carthage and met instant death, a rather grisly death. And Augustine says of Regulus, we don't know exactly what was in his heart, but we know what his deed is that the gods were to be honored not for material advantages. Right? He honored the gods because of their excellence and even sacrificing his own life in that honor. So he had a kind of pre-Christian soul, perhaps, right? And Cato is recognized throughout, right? Who committed suicide after it was clear that the dictatorship of Caesar would prevail. But listen, the reason he focuses on Cato was because the guy really was virtuous. And therefore, it's a nice contrast to Job. Mm-hmm. So is Job better than Cato or not? And at the end of book 1, he says, Cato was great, but Job was better. Yeah. So he does recognize
and remembering that Job is a pagan, right? I mean,
right?
Job's a pagan, just so we remember.
Yeah, but he's taught by God.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's taught by God.
Okay, so I want to talk about common loves, if we can, right? So I take it that common loves is a gesture towards friendship, political friendship. And so I just want to ask what St. Augustine thinks about friendship, politically speaking. And then I want to ask the more specific question of whether he thinks there can be political friendship between Christians and non-Christians, because it seems to me that that would bear on his concept of a people.
Well, let's let Russ answer the last part of your question, because I think he has a brilliant answer.
Well, okay. And so, Father Michael, are you going to answer the first part?
Yeah, we'll get back to that. But I think the second part's, right. I mean, here I'm in Freiburg, where Mary Aquinas McNamara wrote her dissertation on friends and friendship in Augustine. So yeah, I could go on forever about that. But I think the important feature is because it's important. I think it's becoming more and more a pressing question for this pilgrim society in America, as our institutions begin to look very distressingly out of whack. How are we to live amongst our non-Christian or non-Catholic neighbors? So for Augustine, what can Augustine say to us? Is political friendship with them possible, Russ, according to your read of book 19? Or
Yeah, well, maybe first though, Russ, say something about what he thinks political friendship is, so that way we can understand the answer. Yeah.
Political friendship is one mode of social friendship. So friendship in the household, right? In matrimony and in the household, the domestic order is a distinct set of friendships. By the way, domestic order has more than one kind of friendship going on within it, right? Because the spouses have a different friendship than the children with the spouses, okay? And the spouses don't have the same friendship that the children have with one another. So there's actually 3 modalities of friendship going on inside the household. And if you add in slaves, which they did, we're kind of friends. That there could have even been 4 for Augustine in the household. And then there's the friendship among the saints, which is based on faith and hope in things unseen, reality of things unseen, and a heart that's being trained how to love God and neighbor properly. And that's under grace. But the intermediate mode between the household and the church is polity. We call it res publica. And it involves 2 things. First, we can use the word consensus. Now, the word consensus in Latin, which we use in English exactly, is more intellectual. It's like to give consent or to form a consensus to create a federal republic. That's what our founders did. They reached a consensus about what kind of polity to have, a federal republic. So in this emphasizes their mind being on the same page. So then in a political order where we're not tied immediately by familial loves and consensus, so to speak, it's important for a multitude to learn how to reach consensus about important common things. And it's up here, okay. But Augustine adds another element to that, which is concordia. And with a union of hearts, which means they not only agree to have a polity shaped in this way, structured in this way rather than that way, but they also have love of that very polity. And they love one another. They have something in common. Augustine would say, especially Republican, glory, that when Rome becomes so successful, right? And there's so many virtuous characters early on in their experience, all Romans can bathe in that love of that achievement. Their laws were excellent. Romans really knew how to make laws. And then unfortunately, they start loving a lot more than that. And they start loving their excesses. But there is still a common love in the excesses. Every night having flamingo tongues barbecued for dinner, so on and so forth. Gladiatorial games. But that's his entrance into it. It's not the household, right? And it's not the church, right? It's something intermediate. It's perhaps not as intense as household or as intense as liturgy, but it's real. And listen, even in our culture today, where everyone's suspicious of political order and suspicious of that there's any truth telling going on by any of the elites or the politicians. Everyone in their heart grieves when we see it going down. We grieve. It's real. Now, you may not have a proper estimation of it. You may be overcome by your grief, but it's real. And it's testimony to the fact that love was present, a certain kind of political love. Listen, 1952 here in the New York area was great. You had the Yankees, you had Wall Street, you had won the Second World War. There's a love of that.
Are you going to start crying about the move of the Giants out to San Francisco? Then I'll have to get off the train.
And grieving for the Dodgers too.
Well, we can, yes. Anyway, there's that other aspect of the question, though. Can the citizens of the eternal city have social friendship with the citizens of the earthly city?
The answer is in book 19, chapter 17. He deals with it directly. Title: What produces peace and what discord between the heavenly city and the earthly? So for the earthly city, it strives, not through faith in God, it strives by a sort of natural impetus to find peace in the goods and advantages that are to be had in our life here, right? Ordered security, not any kind of security, but ordered security, right? We have a legal system. We have rights and obligations, and we have administration. He uses the word administration. And we have agriculture. We can defend ourselves in the city against aggressors. We have agriculture. We have economic prosperity. These sorts of things are to be had by both the saints and the citizens of the terrene city. We have children. I mean, we could just make a long list of the things that we have in common. Now, we love them differently because the saints love the temporal goods for the sake of the divine city. We love our neighbor, not just as ourselves, but as a fellow creature because of our theology. There's all kinds of ways we love them differently, but the things we love, materially speaking, it's a no-brainer. Everyone wants these kinds of things to some extent, but there's one thing that causes the discord, and it's the one thing he mentions here. And I'll read a couple of sentences.
Oh. We're still on chapter 17.
It's chapter 17. But the heavenly city knows only one God who is to be worshipped, and it decrees with faithful piety that to him alone is to be given that service which the Greeks called latria, and which is due only to God. And because of this difference, it has not been possible for the heavenly city to have laws of religion in common with the earthly city. It has been necessary for her to dissent from the earthly city in this regard and to become a burden to those who think differently. Thus, she had to bear the brunt of the anger and hatred and persecutions of her adversaries, except insofar as their minds have sometimes been struck by the multitude of the Christians and by divine aid always extended to them. So he says, so long, therefore, as the heavenly city is a pilgrim, does not have the laws of religion in common with the pagans, let's say. She summons the citizens of all nations in every tongue and brings together a society of pilgrims in which there is no attention paid to the differences in customs, laws, institutions by which the earthly peace is achieved and maintained. She does not rescind or destroy these things, however. whatever differences there are among the various nations, these all tend toward the same end of earthly peace.
Mm.
That's his direct answer to it.
Yeah,
And what's
it's
really
beautiful.
interesting-
And of course, it takes place at the retail level, on the neighborhood level, city level. You see it function much more acutely, where he talks about, the desire, it desires and maintains a common agreement of human wills regarding the acquisition, the attainment of the necessities of life. And that's the Catholic experience in non-Catholic republics for centuries now. But what happens when your neighbors start to pursue a disordered love to such an extent that what constitutes the basic necessities of life are no longer agreed upon? That poses serious questions for all of us.
Okay, so we're getting close to the 1 hour mark. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to choose what what my final question to be. I mean, I guess let's talk about freedom. So we've talked about virtue, we've talked about happiness, we've talked about common loves. I guess one question I have is, given how different our conception of freedom is from the conception that St. Augustine had, we tend to think of freedom now as personal autonomy. So you're free when you're free from all forms of oppression that inhibit you from finding your true self, which is unique to you, and living authentically in a way that expresses that self to the world in a way that's true and authentic. Augustine has a rather different notion of freedom. And I'm wondering how this bears on the question about common loves in a people. This one's for you, Father Michael.
Well, I mean, I'm acutely aware that our sponsors are in Chicago, and I think, and of this anniversary, I don't think we could do any better than to call to mind Milton Friedman's reaction to Centesimus Annus, which he liked in many ways. But there was the paragraph where John Paul II, as a veteran from the dictatorial oppression of the Nazis, and then under the Soviet model of Marxism after the war, having been a dissident in both of those worlds, he has a paragraph in Centesimus Annus where he talks about, in a very Johannine way, that freedom depends upon fidelity to truth. And Friedman, echoing Isaiah Berlin, says this is a very disturbing notion. And Berlin, his lesson from having survived the Second World War was to say that the best way to promote liberty was to have a notion of freedom that's freedom from, and freedom from constraints. And the way you promote that is by recognizing the transitory and approximated aspect of any of your truth claims. And I think Rabbi, why am I blanking out on his name? The former chief rabbi of London, Sachs. Jonathan Sachs responds to Isaiah Berlin very beautifully by saying that you need to have at least some minimum agreement on right and wrong, or anything becomes possible. And I think that's the great challenge for us today, if we're to preserve our republics, is, does the type of freedom we cherish nonetheless require some communal commitment to some fundamental basic truths about what it means to be human, and that those are the building blocks for what you would want to describe as a freedom for, that makes a freedom for excellence possible, but also that makes the fundamental excellence that recognizes the importance of granting certain types of freedoms that in an ideal society we might not want to. So the very foundation of the kind of liberal society that allows all these different groups to have all their different ideas, doesn't that require at least some foundational truths, or it becomes like the serpent eating its tail? So yeah, I think this is this question about the minimal requirements of fidelity to truth in order for freedom to be possible is not going to go away. And I think it's really dividing the nation.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you want to add anything, Russ, before we move to audience Q&A?
Well, one of the interesting things is if it was a characteristic of liberalism at its apogee and peak of its success to emphasize the liberty of the individual, today what we have is that it's just identities. I mean, it's genders and races and victims, so that how you can have a social tranquility of order where we're fundamentally divided, allegedly, by things that make us almost different kinds of creatures. I mean, how do you deal with this? How do you do justice when there will just be a continual succession of victims, and therefore the polity is always unjust? It's just always unjust. It can never catch up with all the justices that have to be accomplished on this identitarian model. Even the pagans did better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about justice no longer being a thing between you and me, right? But being a thing about institutions. And, most theorists think that, and it's being taught to kids now, think that what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be any one of these ethnic identities, is to just be a node in a broader system of oppression. That's all that it is, right? And so it's all about it's all about the systems, right? It's nothing interpersonal anymore. It's not about virtue.
And the scary thing about it is it removes all the intermediate communities between the state and the individual.
Yep.
So that there are no community of life ceases to be possible except on the most almost like pencil point collection of autonomous little pencil points, but under the umbrella of an extraordinarily powerful state.
I apologize. There's some noise. I'm in a hotel in Charleston. Anyway, so we're going to move now to audience Q&A, and we're going to do something slightly different in that even though it's a webinar, we're going to ask some audience members to ask their questions directly. And so I take it that the first person we're going to invite is Zach Taylor. So Zach, if you could just unmute yourself and ask your question. And just please say who specifically your question is addressed to.
Hi, so I think, I don't know if my question is directed at anyone specifically, whether it's Professor Hittinger or Professor Sherwin, but my question is about the specific loves that President Biden referenced in his inauguration. A lot of the response to him quoting Augustine and citing these loves has been to point to the distinction between the earthly city and the heavenly city, and to say that, well, it's kind of ironic that he's quoting Augustine, because Augustine would just simply say, well, these are loves of the earthly city that loves itself, and they're not especially salutary. And it's a kind of critique of Biden's invocation of this quote. And I was just kind of wondering, though, if we could think a little bit differently about loves, and whether, Augustine would acknowledge more salutary and less salutary loves. And I have in mind, kind of the previous discussion where we were discussing, or you all were discussing rather, the kind of quasi-virtues of the pagans. that Augustine acknowledges and says, well, these kept in check the worst vices until the end of the Republic. So my question is whether Augustine could evaluate those loves that Biden listed and say, well, you know, these may be more or less salutary, more or less desirable than other loves that one could list, and kind of without acknowledging that, well, or simply dismissing them as being the loves of the earthly city.
Jen, do you want to remind us of that list? You had the text at the beginning of your comments.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I have it here. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think Augustine would depend, it all depends on how you define each of those terms, but I think Augustine would see those as part of the goods that he would want the citizens of the heavenly city to try to maintain a common agreement of wills regarding those goods in a way that's ordered towards allowing the citizens of heaven to live their virtues and to live them in a rightly ordered way. So I don't think there's any necessary rupture between the two, but of course it depends on how whether each person is truly pursuing them or not.
Russ, did you want to add something to that? Or?
Yeah, I wouldn't be inclined to quarrel over the list, but when you're speaking in that kind of forum, your language is usually going to drift to things being pretty abstract, right? For Augustine, when he tried to think of what did the best of those Roman Republicans agree to in their loves, common loves, when they really had the salt of republicanism. And there's three words: glory, being their virtues and triumphs being recognized by others. Two, honor, that those who competed for honors for the sake of the common good be recognized. And third, power. Power for the ancient Romans is a fundamental good. It's not merely instrumental. And so the ancient Romans, I think they were more concrete about this, but than Biden's list. But that's no criticism of President Biden. But you know, Augustine tells this wonderful story about how the Romans had a kind of admirable habit when they conquered another people, another city, right, over those centuries. Eventually, they would incorporate the vanquished into their own order. I mean, they would become by steps Roman citizens. But Augustine adds, but not without being vanquished. Because the fundamental good of Rome is the actual act of subduing and vanquishing. Take away that and everything else falls in their scheme of values, right? So Biden says prosperity. I think that's very good. He didn't say riches, but a kind of prosperity, a success in that aspect of life. It seems to me fair game.
Okay, so I have a question from Tomas, which I think is really good because it's an invitation to expand upon something we were talking about earlier. And that is just, so I set up this contrast between what Augustine thinks about freedom and the kind of modern autonomy conception. So Thomas asks, well, look, how did St. Augustine understand freedom so that I can better understand the contrast?
Yes, I mean, he addresses this explicitly. And Father Pincares, to again give another Freiburg nod, quotes this. There are two forms of freedom for Augustine. The first one is freedom from sin, to be liberated from sin and slavery to sin. Augustine, in his own experience, and he articulates this then in his own theology, that's one of the foundational liberating experiences, sanctifying grace. God's love, the effect of God's love on human nature is to free us from our attachment to sin. So that's the first foundational notion of libertas for Augustine, is to be freed from this kind of slavery, both to sin and to the demons. Collectively, it's the slavery to the demons that we are liberated from with the advent of Christ. And then what Father Pinkhairs will describe as a liberté de qualité, which gets translated as freedom for excellence. Augustine has that notion that there's this new excellence, this new glory, which is not human glory, but it's the glory of God, and the freedom to make acts that participate and this is 2 Peter chapter 1, actions that participate in the glory of God and the joy that comes from living that. So the freedom to participate in this action of saving action of God. And one thing we haven't talked about is the way in which, and this is the conclusion of Joseph Ratzinger's dissertation on the church as the people of God and the house of God, is the way in which he comes to the conclusion that in Augustine's work, one of the key notions of the church is the body of Christ from 1 Corinthians. And so that this way of living freedom is to be incorporated into the sacramental mystery of the Eucharist and the cross. And that's the greatest freedom, the freedom to participate in God's saving action through lives of well-ordered love that are what Joseph Ratzinger will say in Deus Caritas Est, at least in the English translation, is a kind of sacramental mysticism. The culmination of which is martyrdom. That's the ultimate freedom, to be configured to the cross of Christ unto death.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have a question from David. Where do biblical truths come into the story? Not philosophy or philosopher, but the Bible as accepted by the church. Russ.
The very structure of the book is the answer. The first 10 books of the City of God are telling the story of the ungluing of Rome and of the Terrene. It's just one more aspect of the Terrene city. And the evidence for it is taken primarily from the ancient writers themselves. And so Augustine allows the ancient writers to convict themselves through their own words and treatises. Christians are not to blame for the fall of Rome. Okay. But books 11 through 22, God speaks. And now we hear a different side of the story. And it begins with scripture, and it begins with the first two sentences of Genesis 1. All the way through, all through the voices of the prophets, so on and so forth. So we're telling a story of two cities, first from the standpoint of the opinion of the ancients, and secondly, from God himself speaking. Yeah, so it's that voice is really important.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at how the City of God begins, the whole portrayal is the way in which, in God's providence, the history of Rome prepares the nations to in the darkness and chaos that have come upon the empire to receive the light of the gospel. and to discover an abiding city, the truly glorious city, and how salvation history from the creation of the world is pointing towards the culmination of the life of this city and creating citizens of this city. No, I think it's that's the great masterpiece. He gives a theology of history whereby pagan history is drawn into, in God's providence, revelation history.
Okay, good. So the next question, I think we're going to let Veronica Ogle. Yes, there she is. Okay, great. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Oh, great. So I guess my question is about, perhaps it's a bit on the nose, and then I wonder what you think Augustine would say about Biden's invocation of his idea. I mean, I think on the face of it, it's a bit out of context, right? He's criticizing the Romans. He's pointing out that their loves aren't, love of God, right? But on the other side of it, you could say, well, Augustine sees that the point of an inaugural address is exhortation, right? So maybe he would find it fitting to take the point and recast it. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
I think I'll make a commercial for Professor Ogle's new book on politics in the city of God. So I'm delighted to have a question from Professor Ogle, Veronica Roberts Ogle. Well, I don't know. I think Augustine, the first thing is he would find it terribly tempting. He describes himself as easily distracted. So I could just see Augustine at the inauguration of a president in this wild country that is the United States, and he would have been tremendously distracted and tempted to go off in every other direction. But I don't think he would necessarily. This is the interesting thing about it, especially when you read how he engages Varro, for example, and Cicero, all the different classical authors. He gives them so much airtime that even though he's going to be a sharp critic of them, he clearly thinks that they have truths, and they have truths that he wants to celebrate. So, and he was also very much aware of the importance of trying to make something work, because even bad government was better than no government, I think Augustine would recognize. And if you look at in the letters and the way in which he's talking to the leadership, the Roman leadership, as things are collapsing in North Africa, I think he would have a certain amount of sympathy for any national leader who's trying to get citizens behind the common pursuit of good things. I mean, I don't think he's not a identity politics person. He's not someone who wants to go off and attack people for whatever reason. And I mean, when you look at the ways in which he gets into rhetorical attacks, it's when great things are at stake, but he's also willing to have correspondence with people he doesn't agree with. He's willing to try to make things work with the Donatists when he can, but when it becomes unworkable, he appeals to authority. So I don't know. I think he would give the leader of a great republic a lot of slack, but calling him to live the words he's putting forward.
Russ, did you want to add something?
Yeah, by the way, when Augustine really tears out after somebody, it's usually after Christian heretics, not Roman authorities. So, I mean, he treats the ancient Roman authorities with kids' gloves compared to Pelagius, right? So, but at the end of book 19, he has a little disquisition on our justice. He calls it our justice as Christians, but Christians here in this world. And he says, what is our justice? it consists only in the remission of sin rather than in the perfection of virtue. And this is borne out by the prayer of the whole city of God during its pilgrimage on earth. It cries out to God with the voice of all of its members, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And back in book 5, when he's talking about the Christian emperors like Constantine and Justinian and whatnot, it's really interesting because Theodosius, he says, what makes them different than the civic leaders we've been used to is that they were capable of repenting of their sins. And, you know, that ties it back to your notion of Lincoln, because Lincoln was very much aware of that kind of address to a populace, right? Sackcloth and ashes is a very useful moment.
Okay, great. So I think we have another question, another live question from the audience. I'll see if it shows up here. If not, I'll just, okay, they're not showing. Yes, okay, there we go. I'm sorry, I have a history of butchering Polish names, so you could just go. I'm not even going to try. Just go ahead and ask your question, please.
Janusz.
Is this me, Janusz Duzinkiewicz? Yes, Polish names can be pronounced if people simply put the effort into it. My question is that I was surprised how that reference to pagans, hadn't Christianity already become the state religion by 380? So how many pagans were there at around at Augustine's time? And then what was his attitude towards Christianity as the state religion that would define what a person should love?
I'll take a crack. Yes, so Augustine is born less than a generation after Constantine Milvian Bridge. And the very year of his ordination, 391, was the first set of more draconian laws making certain kinds of religion illegal. Okay, so I mean, he lived in that world. He knew what it was. And it's very interesting that in book 5 of the City of God, when he talks about Christian rulers, he has almost nothing to say about Constantine. And what he says about the others is more along this pater noster thing. Well, at least they have humility, and they're capable of repentance. But you know what I think he really thought at that time is that paganism was everywhere. And the reason why is that in book 1 of the City of God, he says, the big problem with the sack of Rome is that all these people who called themselves Christians in order to get into the imperial bureaucracy, right? They moved from their household and civic gods to Christianity so they could get a job in the cursus honorum of the Christian imperial regime. He says, they're either not Christians or they're so weak that, they need some major help. And the evidence for it is by the hundreds. They're fleeing Rome, not by the thousands, they're fleeing Rome to get to North Africa, bringing with them the complaint that we thought Jesus Christ was going to make the crops grow. We thought that Jesus Christ was going to do all of the work of our old temples. And Augustine could pick that out right away, that they don't know what Christianity is, or they're very weak in it, because they want the reign of Christ to function like a civic god. And I think it's probably right. You know, it's really a mixed bag. And you might remember at the end of book 1, he says something like this. He says, in time, these two cities are mixed together, corpus per mixtum. He says, and we don't know who is a citizen, because there are people who cavort in all of the old pagan style ways, but might end up being, by grace, a citizen in the kingdom. And there are also those who come to our liturgies who will defect. So I think he's intensely conscious of the fact that Christianity, first, it hasn't really triumphed politically, not everywhere. And the great mission work in the rest of Europe is completely untouched by Constantine and Theodosius and those kind of people. And he's aware that in the cities of the Mediterranean basin, it's a kind of a confused situation, who belongs to which city. And in fact, he uses the word amitere, to slip away. It's sort of like when you see someone slipping away, and people slip away from their pagan and become citizens of the kingdom. And those who are in our churches worshiping slip away back to the gladiatorial games, so on and so forth. So he's intentionally conscious of this as a reality, as historic reality.
Also, I think we want to add first that he grew up in an area where there were still a pagan aristocracy that was calling the shots in those North African cities. His father was a pagan, and he grew up around pagan society, and then pagans are still part of the cultural conversation, even by the time of the sack of Rome, because they are making their views known, and Augustine is responding to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I apologize to all of the people who have great questions in the Q&A, because we're now at the hour and a half mark, and we just don't have time to get to all of them. And I also just want to thank Father Michael and Russ, for joining me this morning. And I think Michael's going to come back on now, wrap things up.
Great. Yes, I indeed, on behalf of our audience in the Lumen Christi Institute, I want to thank you, Russ, and you, Father Michael, for your fantastic remarks today. As I mentioned to the audience, both of these are teachers in our summer seminar for doctoral students on Augustine's City of God. So today you all got a private window into that experience, albeit one that's apart from the wonderful summer weather of the Bay Area, right over at the University of Berkeley. And Jen, thank you for really helping to moderate a fantastic, rich conversation to keep us anchored in the text, but also attentive to how these texts speak to modern times. I also want to thank America Media for co-sponsoring, and really all of our co-sponsors that we've had over this past academic year, and indeed from the beginning of the pandemic, because they've helped bring many of you here today, even if they aren't co-sponsoring today's event. But finally, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this ongoing effort to make the Catholic intellectual tradition a living dialogue partner at the University of Chicago, but also to your homes across the nation and indeed across the world. You can register today for our upcoming events by visiting our website, lumenchristi.org. As I mentioned, we have some fantastic programs coming up, and I would not miss Professor McGinn, Father David Tracy, and Sister Sandra Schneider's as they look at the crisis of mysticism in the 17th century.
Hey, Michael, can I make one remark?
Yes, please.
I want to, if she is still in the audience, I want to congratulate Professor Ogle on her new book on Augustine, which I've read about halfway through now. And it's very good. And we look forward to seeing you at a Lumen Christi event.
And indeed, watch out, Father Sherwin, your spot as co-partner with Russ running these seminars might be in jeopardy.
I'd be happy to sit back and listen to Professor Ogle. I had the privilege of discussing her work while she was a student of Professor Keyes at Notre Dame, and it is a very fine book. I had a privilege of participating in a discussion, a web discussion of it a couple of nights ago, and yes, I look forward to seeing her at Lumen Christi events.
And I would just add then that if you today, at the conclusion of this, fill out our survey, you'll enter a raffle to get a gift card to the seminary co-op with which you could buy Professor Ogle's book, though you need not wait for that raffle to be drawn to already vote with your wallets. Finally, I'd invite you to also support us and also help get word out about these events to your friends, parishes, follow us on social media, share our materials, but also become a financial supporter of our work today to allow us to continue to provide programs like these for free to viewers like you and viewers across the nation by donating at www.lumenchristi.org/donate. Otherwise, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your weekend and look forward to welcoming you back to our Institute and our webinars soon.